like to have
questions.
I like to have questions because I've been talking. I don't know what you want to hear. I was giving you what I wanted to say.
Sir,
Yeah.
I remember once you mentioned that when you were in HCL, you suddenly wanted to leave, and then you said your partner said, "Are you mad? You should take a break, go back, and study for some time." And I remember you said it's always feels good to be student with a lot of money in the pocket. I remember this line, so if you can just.
Yeah, so 10 years into HCL, we went to 80 offices. The company was doing well. It was big. I was getting bored. I was just not enjoying myself. So I talked to everyone and said, look, let me take 3 months off. I had a cottage in Missouri. I said I'll go up there, do my meditation or whatever, do my thinking. I'll figure out what I want to do and I'll come back and let you know after 3 months. And I was thinking maybe I should go back to college, do my PhD, what I always wanted to do, stuff like that. So then everyone got together and said, crazy, 3 months later you'll be as confused as you were now. So the best thing to do is go do a management program somewhere. And you'll meet people, you'll be able to talk to them, you let your guard down a little and listen to them, you're not listening to us. And so that's how I went off to Boston, to the Harvard Business School to do what is called still called the Advanced Management Program. It was a 13-week program. And while I was there, when you go through the courses, I discovered I was going through what everyone now knows or HR people know as the midlife crisis. The midlife crisis, you want to change the world when you're in college, you're close to 40, the world, you haven't done anything, you say, what have I done? I haven't changed the world and my life is going by, all that kind of stuff. No wonder. So I came back from there, I was very clear. What I was really missing was the fun of a startup. No, I didn't want to run a big company. So when I came back, I basically said, hey, don't change. People who've been running it in my absence, let them keep running it. I will take care of all the new initiatives. And so everyone said, that's fine, but you can't only have fun. So the deal was I would take care of all the new initiatives and I would take care of any divisions that ran into a problem. Which is how I landed up in America, because what happened is when Yogesh had to go for his bypass and the order got cancelled, then that was considered a problem, so it became my baby. That's how I was the one who ultimately ended up going to the US. But that was, that was the basis of how that whole thing happened. I had some fun. The two turnarounds I had to do. One was the US, and one was, if you remember, HCL reprograph. You remember we were selling copiers. Modi Xerox was selling copies, and suddenly the bottom dropped out of our business. And that took me a long time. I had to get my people in that division to start believing in themselves. And that took something like 5 months, because I let them set a target. They set the number, they wouldn't meet it. Then they'd set the number next month, but I let them set a number till they met their number. And then I started pushing them to go a little further, and then we had to give them some new products. And actually, again, I don't know how many of you remember, that was the first time anyone did comparative advertising in India. And those of you who were around at that time will know how much hangama that caused on whether it was ethical, whether it was right or wrong. I think we got at least 10x return out of that money we spent on that comparative advertising. It was quite crazy.
I raise a question on maybe in their behalf. In the growth stage of the, let's say, the late 80s, HCL, when we used to all work there before that, it was a growing company, but always very tight on cash, tight on service norms. It was always running like a startup, yet it was growing. And at times it was not very comfortable, in the sense that you had to pay you have to pay suppliers, you have to pay this. You went through with that problem. I just want you to share what changed all that, because for far too long HCL lived that life where it was pushing the advertising budget, it was growing, selling computers on one side. On the other side, it was extremely tight on cash flow. But what changed? Because I think some of them would go through that in their lives today. And if that story you can say, that will help them.
So, HCL, the shareholders in HCL, or the founders or whatever you call them, didn't get any return, any real return for 20 years. Right? The company was bootstrapped for 20 plus years. And bootstrapped really tight because we started with 175. We had to buy an office in Bombay, but because you can't be in the calculator business and not have an office in Bombay. So we bought an office in Nariman Point, in Cuff Parade actually, for 1,25,000. So our working capital was actually 50,000 rupees. And that really is all we had as working capital for 20 years. In fact, again, talking about India in those days, our 10th anniversary, we got together and decided we'll, spend a few days in Udaipur at the Lake Palace. And we're sitting in that Gangoor boat or whatever, have a few drinks and discussing where we are. And it's funny, the investment in that 125 in real estate in Bombay had given us a better return than the 50,000 we had invested in the business. If you take out salaries and taxes you paid and all that, just in terms of return, that was what India was like in those days. So it would have been, just to make money, it would have been better to put it all into real estate rather than take all this effort to run a company and stuff. But yeah, and that's the reason why HCL was always tight on cash. So when someone talked to me, you talked to me, Dipan, about a cash flow problem today, I was thinking to myself, for 20 years, 60% of my life, I only worried about outstanding and why hasn't that D form come and that C form come and, all that kind of stuff. But that's the way you have to, that's why when the slowdown happened, after the bubble burst, everyone told me, you're not stressed. I said, you can't, after you've been through 20 years of this, you can't, this is not stress. I've got $1 million in the bank. Yeah, how can I be stressed? I have to make sure I don't spend it. It's very different to not having the money and saying, I will not miss my payroll any month. And we never missed our payroll. Not a single month we missed our payroll. We always found a way to get out of that. But yeah, it was tough because you worried about your cash flow all the time.
Did the HP deal change that?
No, the HP deal went to individuals. What changed it actually was before the HP deal, Hindustan Reprographics went public. When we reverse merged with Reprographics, that time the shares were considerable, so you could sell some of the shares, plus your borrowing power increased, all that stuff happened. But you had to go public, and that's when the fund problem eased considerably.
So if you see your career, you move from hardware and successes in hardware to the later part where it's all been in the services sector, etc. So how do you feel the experience and what do you have to say about it to people like us who are trying to be entrepreneurs or trying to do new things? Is it that you're saying that there is no future in hardware and that it's only software and services, or what?
On a lighter note, you don't need material, hawa se paisa bana sakte. But getting back to it, that's the transition to this intellectual, the knowledge economy as we call it. So hardware is material, software is knowledge. So I don't know how many of you know that something like 49-50% of the cost of your car, at least overseas, is software in the car today. And that number is going up every year because their cars are getting more and more complex. They're putting more and more intelligence into cars, and there's a huge cost that that software is taking. It's not the material. The material is fairly inexpensive. It's the software that's going in. You look at an aeroplane, you look at any of those. The intellectual property or the intellectual cost that's going into some of these is really high.
You mean the value addition?
Yeah, the value. The value of that work is really high. So that's why if you look at product companies, it's high investment up front and then really great returns. Their margins are very good because the investment's being done, hypothetically, if they don't invest in newer products and upgrading and all that stuff. But you get some 90, 80, 98% margins when you ship. But there's a huge investment that goes in up front to make that product, to develop that product. So that's sort of how it works. Which is why, India has this, how do I put it? We have an opportunity to be the leaders in the world because we control that intellectual, we have that intellectual power. China is much more hardware oriented, right? And I am not sure, I'm not an economist, but I'm not sure that you have to have a big hardware base to get your economy to grow. You need to have a certain amount. I understand that. But I'm pretty sure that a 50% plus services economy will do much better than a 50% plus hardware economy. Your problem is educating your people to become part of that economy. Right? In a manufacturing unit, earlier, you could take people from the farms who would go back and come back. Now you need them a little more skilled, probably a lot more skilled. But in the software industry, there's no question of taking a guy off the street and thinking he's going to write software. You better train them, and there's the whole education, skills, all that stuff. That is where I think we are lacking. And if that doesn't happen, then I have to manufacture. I have to do some basic manufacturing to employ all those millions of people who are not educated. Which is why we talk about that demographic dividend and how we're missing the bus and all that kind of stuff. So it's our opportunity. The next 20 odd years, we can be the leading economy, the leading power in the world, if we had the will to do it. Unfortunately, our politicians are not showing any, I guess they don't have brains, but even if they had them, they're not showing them. Or the ones that have them are not showing. Which also remind me of, I don't know how many of you remember Indian actor called I.S. Johar. So I.S. Johar was a bit of a philosopher also. So he stood for election in 77, I think, from Allahabad against Mrs. Gandhi and a guy called H.N. Baguna. Remember H.N. Baguna, a big name? And in one of his election speeches, he said India is a country of first-class people who are made second class by third-class politicians. I mean, think about it. Right?
Arjun, I wanted you to touch upon two things. One is today's entrepreneurs. How do you see them, in compared to what we've seen in the last 10 years of Indian entrepreneurs, especially the young ones who are coming up? And the other one is, what are the forward-looking areas that you see where India could make a huge difference in the global technology space?
So today's entrepreneurs have a very different deal. First of all, if they've got something, they can get money. Right. Only thing is when you take money, you become responsible to someone outside for giving projections, meeting numbers and all. So the concept of a meri company hai, I can do what I feel like, I am the owner, I am so emotionally involved with it, is a little out of date if you take money. If you decide to bootstrap, yes you can. Problem with bootstrapping today, there's so much competition. If you've got a great idea, unless it's IP protected and you've got patents and stuff, someone's going to come in and do it. Or not someone, many people are going to come in and do it. And your first mover advantage goes away very quickly when other people come in. Also, if anyone comes to me or I go to anyone and say that I will do it more efficiently than anyone else, that's a complete nonsense statement, because there is someone there who will do it smarter, faster, better than you. And if you don't accept that, then you're living in la la land. Right. So that's the first part. Now, what are the technologies that would come up? Again, if I was 25 or 26 today, I would bet on biotechnology. I would bet on something connected with that. I would bet on something connected with genetics in that area.
Nanotechnology.
No, nano, I would have to be a teenager. I think nano is still a little distance away. But it's a great, nano is going to change it. Nano is actually going to change how you look at physics, not just change other things. Internet has only changed how we look at real estate is treated differently and all that. Those terms mean different things. Nano is going to change physics altogether, because the physics of nanoparticles is completely different to the traditional physics we learn. It's just going to, you have to educate people to nano for them to become nanoscientists in a way. Right now we are only the periphery of fooling around with it in some ways. But what's happening today is the old Ayurvedic system. Okay, what allopathy did was it gave you off-the-counter drugs that will take care of things nearly instantly with a number of side effects. Now the side effects are different in different people. Right. What Ayurveda did in the old days was individualized medicine. So your guy treated you for a while, he knew your quote-unquote body composition, and he gave you the drugs accordingly. And so you didn't have, by and large, you didn't have too many side effects, but the drugs took a little longer to cure you, if they cured you. I think what you're going to see with this whole genetic blah blah is allopathy individualized to your specific this thing. And that's going to be phenomenal. Because now you're going to see technology in medicine, in drugs, individualized to your genetic or your body or your, which will be very different to the way medicine has been done earlier. So lots of things are going to change. Also, you've reached a point today where diagnostic imaging gives you more information than the doctor can read. There's more information there than he can interpret. And so you're already beyond the doctor or the medical technician in terms of what data is available. And so, they'll have to catch up, science will have to catch up with what's available. In fact, how many of you saw that movie, I forget the name, but Raquel, they make everyone really small, Raquel Welch's in it, and they put this into the bloodstream and it goes somewhere and fights these germs in someone's body and all that, and it comes out. That's the way they're looking at things today. So they can actually send a little camera as big as a cell into your bloodstream and direct it through wireless or whatever to where the cancer cell or cells are. So it's got a small camera, it can photograph what's going on, and then they can put something to destroy just that cancer cell, photograph it being destroyed, and then biodegrade this camera in your body. Okay, you're already starting to see this happen. Yeah, so, your grandchildren average age is going to be at least 125 to 150. So, they have to look after their bodies very differently. We could do without exercise, as I'm doing right now, but I don't think my grandkids can afford not to. I think the Americans are going to live longer than us. They're so obsessed by doing exercise every day. But yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting field. I mean, starting from delivery of, healthcare in countries like India, or even there, where the system is completely broke, to actually what you're delivering in that healthcare.
Yes, Amit.
Sir, I have two questions. How do you see this knowledge-based business coming to food and agri? One. Second question is, you were with HCL for 20 years.
23.
23 years. Why you suddenly thought to come out? These are the two.
I thought I answered that question because I thought I'd come out and do what I wanted to do. I just didn't know what I wanted to do, but the concept was I want to do something, I don't know what, but if I don't get out, I'll never find out and never do it. So that's how I decided to get out. I always say I don't think I got out. A piece of me is still in HCL somewhere. I have to take it out. It's still there. I can't seem to get it out. But let me answer his first question. Knowledge in food. So, I do believe, many years ago, I read a newspaper report saying that IT export was 20 billion and processed food export was $3 billion. I really thought that 3 billion would have touched more people in this country than the 20 billion of software export. And India right now, we are in the dark ages in food processing. We lose 50% of our produce because I don't have the infrastructure to get them out, whether they're refrigerated vehicles or whatever you need. So I think you really don't even need massive technology. You just need basic food processing. And you need to cut out the middleman in that and get it going. Yeah, I mean, I know Pepsi, even today people talk about the Pepsi plant in that Pepsi set up as part of their do export to get dollars in Punjab. So basically, I think food processing is going to be a huge thing. As far as,
But it is more of material.
it's, yes,
Yes.
it's not, you can
So
do.
how can you get
Yes.
more, like 50% non-material in that business?
You can, but I'm not sure we know enough about artificially
Engineering.
engineered food to say, for me to say, yeah, it'll happen. It's going to happen. You're already seeing seeds and stuff. And actually, the interesting thing that's happening in the US is Accenture and all are working on what they call precision agriculture. So what they're looking at is using analytics, big data, to look at field and look at the data behind it and say how far apart should I put the seeds and where should I put them to maximize my yield from this particular field. It's called precision agriculture. And it is, you're using analytics and big data to try and maximize your output. We should really do that in India. It just takes brains and it takes data, and we have all the data in the world. We have more data because we write everything down. It's lying somewhere. We just need to digitize it and then look at it. And, just to give you an example on what I was at AIIMS Patna, one of the companies I advised, and they had, so there's a disease called what's the name? Encephalitis. In that part of Bihar, it kills 1,000 children every year, has done so for the last 34 years. And basically, what this guy did was he digitized all the data he had on the cases that came to that hospital, and he put Google Maps, and he tracked these by date. And he saw that 90+% of the cases were between one bank of the Ghaggar and one bank of the Saryu. Actually, the other way, Saryu and Ghaggar. And the only time it crossed the middle of the river was near bridges, where the current in the middle slowed down because of the bridge pillion. And then, of course, there was near Gorakhpur, where they went to the hospital. And then when they had floods, it used to go to Muzaffarpur. So he's conjecturing, and it's on YouTube somewhere because he's put this whole thing on YouTube. He's conjecturing that this is feces coming down the river that's causing this. So now they're setting up some traps upriver in both these rivers to try and control the feces right up there, hopefully avoid all these cases and probably save more than half the kids who are dying by just doing this. And he was saying he is digitizing everything in the hospital. In fact, the clipboard on the bed, he's putting a tablet. He is so thrilled with what this data has given him. He says, we've had this data for 34 years. It's been sitting there in paper. He said, never would have been able to do this kind of analysis or come to this kind of conclusion if we hadn't digitized. And so that's the power of big data, analytics, whatever you call it. It's quite huge.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm in my second year of MBA and 25-year-old, as you rightly said. And my school of thought of putting forward this question is from the idea of doing what you want to do. So since the market has a lot changed from the time you graduated and the time now, so I want to ask you that if I were to start a venture into something which is in which some big companies already doing well, so what would be your advice to people like me who want to get into this venture? Precisely, I want to get into wines. Wines, manufacturing wines.
First of all, I want to clarify, I still don't know what I want to do. So I'm still as confused as I was when I was 25 years old. I've actually stopped thinking about it too much because I don't think I'll ever know what I want to do. It's like asking yourself the question, why was I made a human being? Why wasn't I made a dog or something? Why was I given intelligence? What am I supposed to do with this intelligence? And it's very difficult to answer that question because whatever you do, you always think you can do some more. And so you'll never get that answer. That's how I look at it now. Right. Now to get into something like wines, see, you can probably get into any business, but you've got to decide what is your USP in that business. Why would you buy your own wine? Ask yourself that question. And what price would you pay and why would you pay it? That's the first question you got to ask yourself. Logically, not emotionally. Right. Then come and think of, okay, now I know enter the market. I have a market entry strategy. Right. What's it going to cost? Who's going to pay me? Or who's going to fund me for the cost? Who's going to believe in me? I have this great idea. I think I have a USP, but I need $10 million to go in and get at least 2% share in the market, whatever the number is. Who's going to give me $10 million? Would you give yourself $10 million if you had it? So if you're not going to give it to yourself, why would someone else give it to you? So those are the questions you got to ask before you get to it. And the third question is, how do I protect my market once I've got it? What's the barrier to entry once I've created my 2% share or whatever the number is? And I guess the other important question is, I can't do it alone. I need people who have to believe in what I believe in, who come and work with me to make this happen. Where am I going to find them? And I just have one criteria for all people who start companies. Please try and recruit people who are smarter than you. Now I know you don't believe there are people who are smarter than you, but they are there. Go find them and recruit them. Because that way you'll do it, they'll make you look good. And you know, that's how I recruited Vikram. You've got to get people who are smarter than you.
If you look at big companies like let's say Accenture, Capgemini, what we see is that their decision making time is very slow because they take into a lot of factors, they consider a lot of factors, they have a lot of investment made. So every decision they make is very much discussed by all the teams and it takes a long time. However, as I was listening to your starting story, I came to see that for you it was a very fast process, and I felt that you gave more influence or you gave more value to your gut feelings and your instincts. Like you said that you just knew the market, you knew the technology, you did not think about anything else and you just went in. So my question is, do you think that this thinking process that we entrepreneurs have, that what is my gut feeling and I am going with this, does this give us a competitive advantage over the players who are already in the market and who have to follow a lot of procedures for coming to decisions?
So let me just define something a little bit. You know, when I said we have the gut, I got to tell you, we had some 8-10 sales guys. Let's say 5 of them were in Delhi. Every evening they would have to come into office, 5 o'clock plus. They'd sit down, and those days on these rice paper long pads like this, 3 copies, they would make their daily sales call note. You would sit down and discuss every call note with them and say, you know, what are you going to do, what happened, when is the next call, what, you know, all that stuff. So when you say you know what's going on in the market, that accumulated feedback is what gives you a great feel of the market, right? Then you can go with your gut, because your gut is pretty much in the trenches. You're in the trenches. When you talk of companies like Accenture, these guys are sitting 3 layers removed. They don't have that gut, they don't have that data to take that gut decision. So they have to do it through reports, through this, and through discussion, because you're taking an intelligent guess. Here I'm not taking an intelligent guess. I have that, my gut is telling me what to do because I have all the data, I'm in the trenches. So, you know, it's a little difficult to compare. That's why when companies grow big, a lot of people who base their decision on that data, if they start sitting in ivory towers, their decisions are going to go completely wrong. Right, so that's why, you know, whenever people laugh about why do you go for sales calls and why do you do this, that's why you get firsthand what the customer is saying. So when you want to take decisions, that data gets very important. You know, it's really important to know what your customer is feeling. I mean, I'd hate to get a decision from someone who's never been to the field, who, first of all, the field doesn't respect it. So you may not, I mean, they listen to it because you're from head office. But, you know, again, I'll give you another little, I've got a little time, right? So in the old days, what were the 3 most frequently spoken lies? So they were lies, damn lies, and statistics. Right, in the old days. In today's world, what are the 3 most often spoken lies? So the third most frequent one is, darling, I love you. Right. Number 2 is, I mailed the check yesterday. Right. Number 1 is, I'm from head office, I've come here to help you. So just remember that.
So I think we'll take one more. Kamal is there.
Go ahead.
Yeah?
I just wanted to clarify one thing, sir. You said you're still confused. Is it confusion or the hunger to achieve more or do something more? I think it's a
I'll
better.
be confused about that also. I don't know, but I do believe I have one more startup there. So I don't know which one right now. I have to find something that really interests me.
Yeah.
Arjun, just one quick question.
Yeah.
I think, do you feel, because you've bootstrapped, or you've seen HCL getting bootstrapped for 20 years, do you think that the entrepreneurship buzz is just getting a little too much into people's nerve? They are over-analyzing what they are doing and doing comparatives. Okay, this is a company that I'm seeing is visible, is being talked about. Let me try and fall into that footstep. Do you think that pressure was not there for you, or do you think that pressure is there too much in today's companies or today's young startups, where they see themselves getting compared, or they themselves are getting themselves compared against people who've been able to, let's say, get funded, and then you try to do comparatives. So what is your take on that?
So two things. One is we didn't have as much competition. We had some competition, but it wasn't as much. And fortunately for us, most of our competition when we started were the big houses who have those decision-making models. So it was very easy to, so basically when you needed to be nimble and fast, they were throwing investments behind it. And when you needed to throw investments, they were trying to be nimble and fast. So they were out of sync with what the market needed. So that's one, that there is a lot more competition today. Not just, also the glass ceiling about individuals becoming entrepreneurs, the middle class, let me take them, becoming entrepreneurs, definitely there was a much higher need for security in those days, in the 70s and 80s, compared to today. Today, I do believe that one thing the IT industry has done is that it's broken the glass ceiling for the middle class. I'm hoping that the ITES industry breaks the glass ceiling for the lower middle class. And we've got to solve the problem for the so-called economically backward classes. The number they talk about is 300 million. I'm not sure you can get an economic solution there. It'll have to be a political and economic solution, or you'll have to wait for a longer time from what I see. But we do need to find a solution to pull those 300 million people out of where they are to becoming a part of the economy. Right? How? I don't know the answer. I don't see it right now. And in any case, I think it's not going to be my problem. It's going to be your problem. So I don't worry too much about it.
Just 1 second. Please, Rajesh, please. I can say that to you, so I'm telling you. We'll take just one question, ladies and gentlemen, because we have some time issues. So he has been asking for a long time. Wait 1 second before you ask. With this, we will have to close. So you can offline ask him. Okay? Yes, please go ahead.
See, I just wanted to understand the opinion. This is Vishnu Gupta.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see your face. The light was right.
I just wanted to take your opinion. We know how the core banking solution has changed the banking industry and the operations of the financial sector. What do you think? Similar kind of concept working in the health as a core health solution. What will the impact of it?
No, I think it'll have a major impact. The problem with health and banking is that banking had been trying to get a solution for a long time. I remember talking to State Bank, they're buying Kapiti and stuff, spending millions of dollars trying to replicate solutions from the West in here. It's a good thing that iFlex came in and gave a relevant solution. And it didn't come out of State Bank, it came out of Bombay Mercantile Bank, where it was first implemented and developed, and then the other banks took it, and now it's gone worldwide to relevant markets. And that's a classic example of product that will come out of India. But in healthcare, unfortunately, the users are completely non-computer IT savvy. And as long as doctors control the healthcare business, which for some strange reason they seem to, it should be controlled by administrators. It's going to take a long time because doctors don't feel the necessity to understand IT, most of them at least. They feel that as long as they know what they're supposed to know, that's good enough for them. And so until they understand IT, you're not good. Here, to implement something that's sensible for healthcare, the users, it's the domain users who have to know IT. Even in banking is a bad example, but even in things like investment banking, when you look at municipal bonds, the guy who understands, who does the real work is a guy who understands how muni bonds work and who understands how IT works. That guy is a very high paid guy. He's not the back office CIO. He's not the business only guy. He's the business come IT guy in one. That's the guy who is the key, and that's the guy who does the work. The minute I get doctors who understand IT and who run, and now you're seeing doctors and MBAs, I've started to see more and more of them, They are the ones who I think will lead this whole revolution into IT and healthcare. You'll see different things happening, but when you say I want an integrated solution, they are the ones who.
Maybe involvement of mHealth will increase the acceptability.
I beg your pardon?
Involvement of mHealth will increase the acceptability
Which?
of the doctors.
mHealth.
Mobile health.
Mobile.
Yes, to an extent, but it'll only give them. They're still looking at just. It'll improve the healthcare reach and just stuff like that, but it won't. What it won't give you is a drug response curve. It won't give you all that data that's pretty critical for doctors, and that data is available. When you in AIMS or Safdarjung in Delhi, if you go and just take their records and digitize them, and do some data analytics, you'll get that data. It's all there, right? That they won't get until they do some of these things.
Thank you. So I think we should give Arjun a very big hand for on behalf of all of them. There's a small token for you, and I'm just handing it over on the I don't know what it is.